Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Back to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-back conversation where we talk about U.S. MSOs, Canadian LPs, products, and market analysis through the lens of data. I'm joined, as always, by Emily Paxia of Poseidon.
Hi, welcome to the High Rise.
And we've got a very special guest today. Not only a special guest, but on a special day. It's his birthday. Todd Harrison of CB1. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Woo!
Yeah, thanks for joining. The Todd Father himself. As
Todd Father.
as I've seen on Twitter. Well, fantastic to have you guys, and always my favorite conversation of the week. There's so much to cover. It just seems like stuff moves at such an unprecedented pace these days. I thought maybe first thing we could talk about is this EY report, Todd, that you're quoted in. Really good stuff to see in there. And I saw a few notable items that I'd like to maybe discuss. But yeah, how are we, it's great when these reports come out. I think it's validating. Stuff like this happens from time to time. I saw your mention of Morningstar. I think that was yesterday also, talking about, the industry. So always validating. So what do we think are, the report, Todd? How'd you find it?
Well, they contacted us, and we were happy to help get the word out. Cannabis, I think, as you guys would agree, is miscast as a villain in society, and it's part of the solution on a lot of fronts, on an economic front, on an employment front, and on a wellness front. And as we unwind a lot of these myths, as this moves into a taxable realm, as societies begin to adopt and learn and grow, and as we research the plan and start to understand the efficacy on the horizon, I think that's the part that's really exciting, and we can get into that. But it's all good, right? We're still so early, and that's what I try to remind myself during these long weeks of the summer and these long months of drawdowns, because of artificial reasons, not because of the fundamentals of the company. So it's frustrating but exciting, and by the time we get to where we want to be, it'll be over, or at least different. So we try to enjoy it.
For sure. The title's really interesting. When the ground beneath your feet starts shifting, will you stand still or leap forward? Key cannabis sector questions to ask now. Is that a signal of, things are going to be changing pretty quickly, or things are changing now?
Well, if that's a question to me, Emily's, she's as good as it gets in this space. I'll tell you, I think this is sort of the eye of the storm. We had this huge year-over-year rally. 2020 really planted the seeds of the U.S. cannabis industry. It was COVID. It was the economic and employment engine we talked about. It was Black Lives Matter, the social justice piece. It was the state-level adoption in November. And even Schumer, who's catching a lot of grief, but it took Connecticut 5 years to legalize. The country is much more complicated, but we do think that we're going to get incremental movement. And we talk a lot about how this is sort of the bear case if nothing happens. Okay, if nothing happens at the federal level, you have the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut coming online next year. Rhode Island, Delaware, we could throw them in as garnishes, so to speak. But there are states, like big total addressable markets, keeps getting bigger. And we think we're going to get incremental movement because Senator Schumer from New York has a social justice program that needs functional banking. He might want, as a Senate Majority Leader, to use that as really the baseline for his legislation. But as a senator from New York, he's got to open up the banking for the social justice initiatives, and because it's the right thing to do, and it's long overdue. So all of this stuff is incremental. There's a lot of custody issues. There's a reason that institutions can't buy these stocks right now, and it's artificial, it's transitory, because they're going to figure it out. And these stocks are going to re-rate. So for as much as we can complain about this current malaise of kind of sloshing around in a ghost town of illiquidity, this may be as good as it gets in terms of long-term opportunities and timing going into the back half of this year, next year.
Yep. Yeah, I happen to agree with that, Todd. And I liked it's funny that you pointed that outside, because I liked that idea too of the shifting sands. And Morgan and I, since we launched the firm, have talked about how you have to be really nimble and adaptable in this industry, because it's really ever changing, and it's in motion. And, you know, the number one thing, though, when conditions are changing is not to panic. And you have to really stay focused on what you think is the long game, and that usually it will get you through. And it has gotten those of us who have been in the space for a while, it has gotten us through. And it's funny, I've been thinking about the word that I keep seeing popping up, which is that this is a dip. I mean, a dip, when I think of a dip, is like a little in and out. Like, I mean, this has been like a bath. But, you know, it's like, you just kind of, you got to settle into it. Yeah.
It's
and
relative.
you
Yes,
it is very relative. Yeah. And so we're just kind of, and if you look at it, it is really kind of like a sliding sideways while more fundamentals are built and while more markets are getting ready to be opened up. And I agree with you, Todd. Like, if this is the worst case scenario, and I know you guys will be talking a little bit about what it means to have cannabis broader than just what it exists as today, which is like a siloed sector. But when cannabis starts to penetrate all of these other categories, what the total addressable market actually really balloons to. But I think, like, I mean, worst case scenario, we talked about it last week, when a new market opens, you can see over 100% year over year growth. And so if we're talking about the tri-state area, and, you know, I've heard Ben reference New York market as $5 to $7 billion market. I mean, it will grow regardless of whether or not we have any change at the federal level. It'll just continue to be frustrating. And the thing that's been making me the most frustrated right now is that the lack of access to exchanges is like really limiting what could be a generational growth builder or wealth builder for people. And so what it does is it makes it so that it's not democratized and not accessible, because people can't just pop in and trade it the way they can with almost anything else. So I think it's actually creating
and that speaks to, again, when you talk about that TAM, like, and I don't know the order, but you're going to get Maryland, Pennsylvania, Florida, Ohio, right? Like, these are big states, right? And they're all coming on, and with them, there's senators. And with those senators, the desire to protect the state level revenue and jobs. Everyone's talking about the bugaboo that's interstate commerce. Okay, it'll shift things around, but it's not the death knell. Like, the really only potential death knell, and I don't even think it's a death knell at this point, is the FDA. Because Schumer's already said there's no shot that they're going to get in the way. They'll carve it out like cigarettes or alcohol. And if we really get a nothing done at the federal level for the next, for Schumer's term, and by the time McConnell comes back, potentially, you're going to have the East Coast online. Good luck trying to, take that money from them. So we play through these war games in our mind, like, what are we missing? And what we're missing is there's a lot of things that we don't see on a custody clearing level. BAML, Bank of America, Credit Suisse, UBS, Pershing last year. I mean, they're trying to choke the industry from the capital markets. And I hope that when this turns, and it will, it's a matter of time, that we remember which banks tried to step on our throats during this time, and we remember which banks are going to be part of the solution and should benefit financially as this builds into this secular growth engine that we all know it is. So, yeah.
Yeah, that great points. The TAM, I think with the population, when you roll up New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and include Pennsylvania, it's well north of the population of California. Bigger than California, bigger than Canada. And that's just those 4 states, not to mention the other ones like Florida, that you mentioned, just adds to that pool. So we're going to continue to see good growth, which reminds me of a quote you have right at the front of the report here from EY, talking about the $300 billion illicit global market moving into the regulated and taxable realm, over time. And, at Headset, like we project sales to be about, $35 billion in the legal market. So it's just a tenth of the illicit market. But you make a really good point here that it's, the illicit market, as far as we know, how big it is and all that, it's primarily dried flower, really not, these other formats that can get created, and not, the ecosystem of services and innovation that can wrap around this industry as well. So I think, like, the point you're probably making is, like, 300 billion, it's a big number, but it's like barely the number. The number is probably much higher.
Oh, it's an ingredient. So if 1.0 was Canadian cultivation and funded capacity, remember that? 2.0 is CPG, cannabis as an ingredient, and not just for recreational or vice or societal the way most people will think of cannabis. You're talking about most of the cannabinoids in the cannabis plant are non-euphoric. They're all therapeutic, but most of them aren't going to get you high. They're all uniquely therapeutic, and they're going to be ingredients across a number of use cases and end products. Pet supplements, cosmetics and vanity. The hemp plant, ubiquitous as a crop across, biofuels, hempcrete, plastic composites. I mean, it's green. This is going to be a big thing, and that's contemplating 300 billion of an ingredient. I think you can start to extrapolate what that's going to look like across the industry lines, and that's along. I understand most people are thinking about smoking, but most people used to think about listening to music by vinyl records, right? This is going to be eating it, drinking it, rubbing it on, taking bubble baths in it, and it's going to be across a lot of different industries, and it's exciting, right? Like, it got villainized. Most people who don't know the history about how this was weaponized as an immigration tool to stop Mexican immigrants. I mean, they've been using cannabis as a wellness and therapeutic supplement for centuries. 30,000 years they know of use, as 10,000 years as medicine, as wellness. They used to give it to babies, Eli Lilly, back in before they weaponized it. So this is the exception, not the rule, is my point. And as this moves back in, our generation just happened to be programmed. I mean, I got into this space after 9/11. I found myself smoking cannabis to sleep and for the anxiety. And I went to Dr. Julie Holland, and I used to tell her how guilty I felt about it. And she said, "Why do you feel guilty?" I said, "Well, because it's bad. It's a gateway drug." And she opened my eyes to the science. And once I went down that rabbit hole, like, I've never looked back. And by the way, I'm no longer on that pharmaceutical poison anymore. And I'm much happier. My kids like me. I'm less moody for the most part, depending on what's going on, of course. But you get my point. So this is a category killer across pharma. They know it. And which is why they've spent billions and billions trying to repress it. But as the research starts to demonstrate the efficacious agility of 3.0, that's where this gets like, I mean, we at CB1 Cap, we put on research, we started a research repository by indication for what the endocannabinoid system touches. It regulates neurotransmissions. It's a big deal. And it's like, there's a lot of things on there. You're like, holy cow. So I won't get into that now, but like, it's worth looking at, because it's really, like I said, it's a rabbit hole for the intellectually curious. This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I happen to agree with that. It's interesting that you mentioned about the heritage of using cannabis compounds as part of a healing history. And in our investment in Mexico with a Mexican family-run company, the focus they have on the consumer wellness side is really about ancestral kind of healing formulations, that cannabis is just one of many key compounds of plants, of things that come out of the ground that are indigenous to Mexico. And that's what they're leaning on, is that it's really about this ancestral healing path. And it's very different from the way our healthcare exists today. And I think it's all about just having it as a part of your life rather than trying to isolate it into these different areas. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. When you start to think about it that way, then it just blows the roof off of all of the ways that cannabis exists across everything that we touch.
It's the late stage adopters that still think this is more likely to cause cancer than help solve for it. If you understand how it's an anti-inflammatory, how inflammation is disease manifests, like, this is actually helping to solve for the underlying condition, as opposed to being the Band-Aid. And like I said, it's a category killer across pharma. They know it. This has been a dirty little secret between the government and the drug lobby for a long time, but the cat's out of the bag, right? And by the way, like, that's just why, like, for the 1% of people you talk about who are really passionate about cannabis, they've seen the efficacy up close. They've seen, I know people who have gotten off of like seizure medication that was debilitating, and for cannabinoid, and it's not just, it's not snake oil. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna have cannabis. It's part of a healthy diet, exercise, routine, right? It's about wellness, but it's a game changer. So all of that stuff, I think, as that comes through that clinical pipe, will illuminate the consumer curve. Right, all these people who are like, I'm not going to touch it, are going to come to it because they're going to learn that it's actually good for you. And that's all in front of us still.
Yeah. I just wanted to share, I saw this quote from Michael J. Fox a couple of weeks ago, and it really struck me. And just like when you have been a true believer in cannabis, but then it's always reaffirmed when you meet people whose lives are positively impacted by it. And he said, if there's anything that working with CBD oil has shown me, it's that there's always hope, even for the hopeless. And he's been living with Parkinson's for so long and has gone through so many, I mean, what he's done to raise awareness and funding for not just Parkinson's, but MS and other, and ALS and other areas of these diseases that are so painful for people to go through chronically and then in the end very severely. I think just that reinvigorates me when you can see somebody who's had that kind of exposure to so many resources and then to say something so positive about a cannabinoid. And right now I feel like for that whole thing, CBD is just the tip of the spear. So,
well, I mean, that's what GW found out. That's how I got into studying the science. But when they, I mean, only 4% of frontline for child, it's a rare childhood epileptic disorder, but only 4% of that treatment, you know, is cannabis, like through the front door. This is all coming after they've tried everything else, nothing's worked, and they're like ready to give up, and they're finding cannabis, as opposed to this being the lead punch. And that's what's got to change, because these are kids who are seizing like 300 times a day, who are now living normal lives and seizure free. Like, not all of them, but enough of them that they're there. And it's like, okay, let's think deeper. Okay, what's dementia? It's a degradation of the mind. What's THC do? Oh, it stimulates brain cell activity. Okay, well, let's go study that for a while. Right, let's go see where that way, and of course, you know, they're finding things there. So, like I said, this efficacious agility, this notion that it's not just for this, that, or the other thing, you know, for sleep. I mean, we talk about what Ben is doing with snoozeberries and with CBN, which is specific to sleep, you know, as opposed to CBD, which is is going to stop you from obsessing. It's an I'm blanking on the word, antipsychotic. But yeah. CBN is specifically suited to help you sleep, and that's going to be a category killer for things like Ambien and the like. So there's just a lot to look forward to on that front.
Yeah, so much, you know, the wellness, pain management, the medical side, you know, and kind of in this report, it does talk about these innovation areas. And one of them is the endocannabinoid system research, right? Like the way we're all wired and how it's, how it affects us. It's still like early days, and there's probably so much yet to learn around this stuff. And that's just, you know, one example of an area of innovation. So it is one of the most exciting industries. And I think, you know, your story, Todd, is similar to everyone, you know, that I know that is pretty serious about this category. You kind of get involved for one reason or another, whatever it may be, you know, some exposure to it. You know, for me, it was this emerging category that looked like it was growing quickly, and I wanted to get involved. And once you get involved and you actually start to learn about like the harms of prohibition, you know, how we've, you know, been programmed in so many ways, you know, all this, the benefits, you kind of really kind of get this, another level. It's not just about, you know, business opportunity at a certain point, right? It's about really changing things. Exactly. And, you know, like everyone, you know, says they want to be part of something, or we're going to change the world. And, you know, everyone has an impact on the world in different ways, but this one is such a clear impact in so many ways. So, yeah, I mean, I think everyone.
You think about it, they first discovered the endocannabinoid system in the early 90s. I graduated Syracuse in 91. So like I came out of college and they found this thing. It was the most ubiquitous network of receptors in the human body. And by the way, it helps to regulate neurotransmissions. They figured out what this is, and they figured out that the endocannabinoid system is identical in action to how the cannabinoids in cannabis make you feel. So THC is actually like the runner's high. Most people used to think it was endorphins. Like we now know a runner's high is actually the same ECS triggering as if you smoke cannabis or ingest THC, I should say. And so like that was first discovered when we started CB1. We sat down with everybody we could. We sat down with the big pharma analysts at some banks, and they left us out of the room when we started talking about this, you know. And 4 years later, the same analyst published a 100-page white paper on the exact same thing that we were talking about. That, you know, the point is you don't know what you don't know. Medical schools didn't teach this for a long time, and certainly you couldn't study the plant because it's Schedule 1, so you couldn't do the research. all of that happened overseas. So all of that is going to happen. It's going to happen much faster now that they're going to open up research, which is, again, going to illuminate the consumer curve. I keep talking about this part because I think a lot of people are waiting for 2.0 to unpack, the CPG story and the uplisting and all that. But that wellness piece is going to really be the baseline for, I think, the whole thesis going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. It's across so many areas. The human biology. This report breaks it out into like genetics and production, business side. Capital equipment, digital. Software, product form factor, format, performance, delivery, and devices, and then customer engagement. I mean, all these areas are areas of opportunity. So when I think, thinking about the 3.0, it's really unlocking all of this, and there's a little bit across all of these areas, but I think it's just the beginning, and it's gonna open up pretty quickly. So this is this report available? How do people find it? It's coming out. Okay,
so
great.
I don't even know if I was supposed to share that, but I get excited sometimes.
Well, it's a great report. Looking forward to it.
Morningstar one as well. It's like a 40-page report. Morningstar is no slouch. I mean, right. And they're out, and it's maddening to watch, cannabis move as a monolithic asset class when certainly you have, a handful of companies that are going to be really, really good, like the fangification, and so many new companies coming up, and so many exciting companies across all of these different specters. I mean, it's going to get harder. Like, everyone's waiting for these names to get uplisted, and yes, we're going to make money from here to there, but once these names are on the big board, and Goldman and Morgan and everybody's covering them, it's just going to get harder. Like, it's going to be fun, I think, but it's going to be different. And of course, there is the question, what happens with the broader market by the time that happens, because there's that thing going on, as we're talking as well.
Well, that's a great, transition into the markets and just kind of what's going on there. And I know both of you are really close to it. And there have been cycles over the past few years, seasonality. Do you think that some of this is just cyclical? What do you think is driving kind of the markets today?
Are you talking about the cannabis markets, or are you talking about the broader markets?
Cannabis in the context of the broader markets.
Yeah.
Well, I think the broader markets are no longer like free markets, and if you're trying to rationalize that through the lens of the four traditional metrics of fundamentals, technical, structural, and psychology, you go batshit crazy because it doesn't make sense. If you look at the markets as a matter of national security and World War III versus China and others with intellectual property and currency wars and all of these other invisible bullets going back and forth, it starts to make more sense. I don't know. I used to really understand the broader market. I've now begun to understand that I really don't understand it, other than the notion that excess breeds excess, and there's going to be another side to this. I don't know when and where, but it will happen. Cannabis, I think, is going to go from a afterthought to a core component, a growth hedge, the way gold used to be, the 3 to 5% of your portfolio. I think cannabis is going to be that for the mainstream markets over time. It's going to get indexed. It's going to get listed. There's going to be ETFs. There's going to be so many financial products you're not going to be able to shake a stick at them. And it's going to be harder because there's going to be a lot of good companies, and there's going to be seasonality, and there's going to be reports about, a cannabis syndrome, like there was VapeGate. Like there's a lot of misinformation, but cannabis, where it is in its cycle right now, I think is the most asymmetric opportunity of our generation, right? I'm all in, like everything. I was looking for change in the couch before we got on. All in, right? 100%. And looking for more money to put in, because when this goes to where it's going, we're never going to have an opportunity like this again. So if I'm wrong, wouldn't be the first time. But I don't think we are.
Yeah. I mean, I happen to agree with you. There's, oh shoot, I'm forgetting who said it. So it's like in the short term, the markets are a voting machine. In the long term, they're a weighing machine. But I agree with you right now. I just think it's a gambling machine. But on the cannabis side, I think we are Yeah, the opportunity is here. I mean, we have seen over the past several years that the Q1, Q2, you can see kind of a drawdown and kind of a correction. This summertime could be a very different summer because, it's the post-pandemic here in the US. So I feel like there could be some really interesting different things that happen in the way people spend their time and where they are and what they're doing. Like, I think it's going to be a very active investment period for us. Some people used to think of it as more of a sleepy time, but I think we'll be allocating a whole lot right now. And especially to Todd's point, the more that the tide recedes, the more I want to get things on the board. I want to lean in on this because that's where we've really driven our outsized returns, is when we've had, the knowledge and the experience to lean in on it. And I agree with you about the fact that this is just absolutely asymmetrical at this time. And I look at these businesses and I look at what the market's doing, and I just think the time is now. So, I do think it is interesting about some of the seasonality on it, and interesting drivers around that. And I look at what happened in the last few years, but. And then, it used to be such a catalyst-driven market in terms of any state would turn on and then the market would respond. And, the New York news came, and I actually I got choked up because, that's a huge deal that we're even where we are with New York. I know we have a lot of work to do to get the market open, but I got pretty emotional about that because it was just such an enormous shift for me in terms of how far we've come. And the market was like,
Well, there's a few things too, because first of all, again, coming off 1,000% year over year, not everyone, but like Green Thumb, like 900%, whatever it was. Like they were going to take a third off the top by hook or by crook. Like you don't know why, how, but that makes sense through a longer term lens. As we sit here, and I'll tell you, like I always try to poke holes on like, what am I missing? What could we be missing? Is there the possibility that people are spending their wallet now on trips and restaurants rather than cannabis? Like maybe, like on the increment, I am, sort of. But my point is, like, I get it, right? And so, like, if the second quarter numbers are a little soft, okay. But, like, then you got, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut coming on next year. You got the back half of this year, which is going to scale. And then these giant states. You got Florida, you got Ohio, you got Pennsylvania. Like these, and that's if nothing else happens over the next 3 years, you're going to get 2 to 3 giant states coming on board. And all of these states are going to regulate who can buy, process, and sell cannabis. So like the federal, like this worry about, the Fed is going to open up. No, the states are going to control it. They're going to control the process. There might be some movement around interstate and other things. I don't think cannabis is on, we talked about this before, but on the Controlled Substances Act for another reason, that you can't have broad-based criminal justice reform while cannabis is on the control. It's going to be like, okay, we're going to Schedule 2, like Biden, okay, we're going to make a Schedule 2 like cocaine. So you're not going to be in jail for 20 years, you'll be in jail for 15. It doesn't make sense, right? So like, I think all of the giant sort of risks are off the table. I think with Schumer, you have a situation where the best case under McConnell is the worst case under Schumer, and that's you get SAFE plus, and fine. Like, okay, and by the way, SAFE in and of itself won't trigger uplisting, but it'll trigger AML and FinCEN guidance to be updated, which we think will allow for uplisting. And the exchanges want, we're working toward getting those levels of controls and compliance in place for the suspicious activities reports, even if we have to go through more time as we are now. But if what we're saying, thinking, and feeling is right, and hearing, more importantly, that Schumer's going to attach SAFE Plus to must-pass legislation this fall, the market should begin to price that in. Maybe it started today, but this summer, to Emily's point, I think it's going to be an uneven summer, and I think we're going to have a big back half of the year rally.
Yeah, it's
I think so.
just tracking the sales. Your point around are people going to restaurants? Are they traveling more, spending their share of wallet other places? Just it's a challenge just even during the pandemic to really understand, behaviors and what's driving, sales and not driving sales in certain places and certain times. And it can be tricky from an analytics perspective. And so, yeah, we're going into another period because I think we're just getting into a routine of, okay, we're in this lockdown for a long time, as after the first 3 to 6 months where we're all adjusting, like, is this ever going to end? And then we kind of got used to it, and now we're transitioning out. So it's another one of those periods of flux. So it'll be interesting to see, how that goes and how that does impact the capital markets. If sales do go up, like if people are, purchasing more cannabis and maybe not traveling or spending their share of wallet, or maybe they just have more money to spend, we'll see if that moves things and the other way around too, right? If they are traveling more and so on. But the Connecticut news, you mentioned, Emily. I mean, it's funny, like I think we've talked about this before, like, when the state legalizes, it's such big news. Like, we're like opening a bottle of champagne around here, when that would happen. And now what have we got? Like 5 in this year, I think, alone. Rhode Island right on the horizon here. And so maybe there was always an expectation like that would happen. Is that all priced in at this point, or people just know, and so it doesn't move the needle like it used to when you'd see the headline Connecticut legalizes and you'd see more interest. That's what I would seem to notice. But is it priced in, or are people just so used to it, or we're just like expecting it now? Like, who's the next one? We're just acclimated to it.
I mean, I personally don't think it's priced in. I think just people haven't really wrapped their arm. I don't think they're paying close enough attention to what the implications are. I don't think that they are. I just don't think we have a deep bench at the table here, or, playing in the names or investing in the names. And so, those of us who have been long the sector, we see these things happen. And we're like, yep, validation. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's bringing new people into the sector to invest. But
that's by design. I mean, listen, as somebody who's now been, managing money in this space since 2017, invested in it, for much longer, but this, the seasonality, I sort of kicked myself, in February, because like you felt like last year there wasn't the seasonality, but there was also, again, after Pershing, who was the biggest custodian for cannabis related securities, they had walked away from the table before COVID arrived, really stuck the knife in the back of the space, and it was existential risk time. It was like 60% cost of capital for some guys, usury laws, and then the pandemic hit, and everything started to, that slow motion perfect storm we talked about, started to evolve. But now we're seeing much of the same, right? We're seeing the custodians, the banks walking away. Why? Right? Why? There's a few reasons. I think one of them is that a lot of them had to articulate a cannabis-related securities policy because they needed something that would be updated if and when legislation arrives. Another reason is there was that whole Archegos, if I'm saying it right, situation earlier this spring, really had a lot of custodians and banks really policing their primes and policing their policies, and cannabis was sort of the last thing they wanted to deal with at that time. But you don't, you can understand the why, but the what. The resulting what is you're buying hyper growth at reasonable, if not absurdly cheap multiples, depending on which year you're looking at. After second quarter earnings, we're going to start comping 2023, and that's going to be really mind-boggling, I think. We've been waiting for 2022. This is sort of a mulligan quarter, second quarter. Like, we know Nevada, we know Florida, we know Illinois, their numbers are really strong through the first 2 months of the year, of the quarter. Not, massive, but certainly not a massive drawdown. We don't know June yet, but okay, if June's soft, what do we have in the back? Markets look forward, right? So the market's already priced out the fact that there's not going to be sweeping legalization, which most people think is what we want. The people who really know this industry understand that the slower this takes, the more incremental this becomes, the more value creation, the more wealth generation is going to be, it's going to end up happening. Like Jason Wiles says, you can pay us now, you can pay us more later, right? It's not up to us, right? We just adjust our sales, Poseidon, right? But I think, where we're going is up and to the right.
Yeah.
I hope. At this point, I got no place left to go. So that was a Zach Mayo.
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, all those things, I think make so much sense. So I'm with you. I think it'll all get there. And, this industry, these states legalizing, it does take a while for the framework to come in, but the ones that are active, continue to grow. And, we'll see, June numbers here. But from what we've seen in the markets we track, nothing's fallen off a cliff or anything. So things seem to be tracking just fine on our side here. So, yeah, we'll see how that goes and how these capital markets shake out. Always interesting. Anything else on the capital markets you guys want to touch on?
Yeah, today I wanted to, just since we have Todd here, I wanted to talk a little bit about, we have more analysts than ever covering the industry, which is good. I think it's creating, more and more information. But just since I have the two of you here, I've just been thinking about, as we continue to, and I agree with you, Todd, by the way, like the way I feel about it, we're just building an amazing foundation for when institutional capital comes in, and God knows we're going to have to buckle up for that moment. But I'm just thinking about like what data can we be sharing? What are the things that we think are missing in the conversation around cannabis businesses and the trends in consumer behavior around cannabis that we could maybe focus in on? And maybe this is just something we can think about today, but I want to think about how we can start setting the stage for people to understand how this sector works, the consumer trends around it, and the growth of it, because I just don't think everyone is able to wrap their minds around it. And, one of the interesting data points that came out recently, which I was excited about, is we've been living in this world with the Pareto principle where, the 20% of the people drive the volume of the sales because they're buying the most. And the whole industry has also been trying to open this up to increase the broader consumer segments, broader purchasing trends, maybe lower dose items, getting more resonance. So and one of the pieces I saw, Sai, that was from your data was that there's been more volume of transactions in addition to the dollar spend, which indicates that there are more people consuming cannabis and buying cannabis. And it's not just all the same people with the same high volume. And I thought that was an encouraging piece of data coming out of Q1 2021. So, and I was just thinking about what other things we can do to relay that this, because I worry, and sometimes I have to argue with people that the industry, it's like, oh, it just grows because it goes from illicit to legal, and then it's like got a stopping point. But as we've been talking about today, it's so much bigger than that, and there's so many people who haven't even come to the table yet. So, I'm just kind of curious to hear what both of your thoughts are on how we can kind of help to educate the investor community as a whole around this.
I mean, I think you answered your own question at the end. I think it's an educational process. No, I'm being honest. I think it's it's about doing it in a way that your audience wants to digest. It's about wrapping the cough syrup in the cookie dough. Like that old saying. I don't know if I just made that up, but I think it's an old saying. But it's it's making the education entertaining, which is why sort of if you read sort of my weekly notes, like I try to keep them entertaining, because otherwise you lose people's attention. And if you can educate them while they're smiling, they're going to absorb it and remember it better. So there's a reprogramming that needs to take place across society. And it's interesting, you have the data, the fastest growing segment, the older generation, and it makes sense, like as we get older, the tone of our endocannabinoid system changes. So of course the cannabinoid, it's almost supplementing your natural body's processes. It makes sense. So that's why we're so keen on Florida. We think Florida is going to be the cannabinoid wellness capital of the world because of the 3.5 times national prescription average, because of the elderly population, because of the science, right? And following the science, I think, is really the baseline again. So not about getting high, it's about getting well. It was the first thing we trademarked when we started CB1, because we're like, that's it. It's not about getting high, it's about getting well. And I don't even know why we trademarked it, because it's not like we're ever going to make money of it, but it's just right. And the reality of the situation is, if society could get away from their ADDness and their social media and just start to try to pay attention to this as something that's part of the solution, and not a sort of, couch potato sort of thing. It's a process. Right? It's a process. And follow the money, by the way, because it's the only thing that's moving this forward. You could say, oh, it's the efficacy. Oh, it's no, it's the money. Like, the states need the money in a post-pandemic world. People need jobs. That's why the FDA is going to stay out of the way. And social justice is going to have its day. The war on drugs is going to have its day. Thank God. This thing really fucked up everything. Nancy Reagan. Thank you very much, Nancy. Anyway, I'm sorry. I just think it's a black stain on the soul of this country, and this country has blood on its hands. Right? Nixon is on Google blaming the Jews and saying bury the data. Google it. Nixon cannabis. He blames the Jews.
He's really reprehensible.
Sorry, I snorted.
No, it's
I had a birthday lunch before this, so
I love it. You're so happy.
All the Anslinger stuff. The fact that it's a Schedule 1, even though during the studies they said don't schedule this at all. There's no reason for this to be scheduled. It's
they
insane.
Didn't know what
it's
marijuana
insane.
was. That was the slang word. They were already using cannabis across society for so many different reasons. So,
right.
Yeah.
And then you're right, it's a stain. And not only here, but, the rest of the world too, right? Because so much of drug policy in other countries is driven by the U.S. And
that's right.
It's going to take some time to unwind. But the good news is, we're slowly unwinding it here. And then hopefully globally it can unwind. And I think, the same problems, the stuff that we still deal with in, certain states that have, prohibition here in the U.S., all the things have gotten, significantly better over the last decade. But, the stuff that still happens, incarceration of people of color, all of that type of behavior, still exists in other countries. There's a lot of heartbreak that's happening out in those places because of the drug policy. So yeah, all those things you're saying are right on, and it's crazy that we're here and it's unwinding slowly, but we are. And I guess to your question, Emily, the demographics, I think, tell a great story. I think, an older audience coming in for things like wellness, pain management, I think is a big one, looking at, I don't want to use this arthritis cream. I want to use something else that might help. The sleep example is a great one too, right? I need something that'll help me sleep, and I don't want to keep taking Ambien, because if I happen to have a glass of wine and Ambien, I lose my mind. That's not a good story. So cannabis is a great alternative. And then on the younger generations, these kids, 21 plus here in the US, have grown up with cannabis being legal their entire lifetimes, and they're not as programmed, I would say. They haven't gone through the DARE program, and they more accepting right out of the gate. And, they're using it, for, who knows, pain management, wellness as well. It's certainly recreationally as well too. I think that's what's so interesting, is that, why we call it adult use is it encapsulates so many different use cases, right? So I think
you shouldn't be smoking until you're 25. That's the truth, because you're not fully developed. And I know, I'm being a hypocrite because I started much earlier than that, but I didn't know what I know then now. And the reality, I have twin 17-year-olds now and then. Not that they listen to me, but I basically say every time that you would use cannabis, and one of them is an athlete, doesn't. And I'm not saying the other one does. I'm not saying that. It's Islam. But all I'm saying is, what I tell them is, if you were to use cannabis, it's like taking the day off of developing. So have fun, but just if you do it every day, expect to be your size forever. Which is really true. And I don't think they believe me. But as you get older, again, as the tone of your endocannabinoid system changes, paradoxically, it becomes much better for you. And I think that's the part of the story that a lot of people are missing.
Yeah, that's true. And this is where the science comes in, studying it, the stuff that's been so hard to do over time. But yeah, it's important that people are mindful of that. And I think that the other thing, another good narrative for growth is just the categories and the types of products and the innovation that's coming to these products. And, you know, when you mentioned not smoking, Todd, I mean, I think you mentioned like literally not consuming cannabis, not necessarily. I mean, smoking, you know, is a whole another, you know, can of worms, right? Just like cigarette smoking, smoke in general, combustion. And there are, like, you know, although flower is, you know, still the top selling category, there's ways to consume flower that's not smoking, right? Vaporizing and so on. But these other formats, you know, I think there's a lot of exciting innovation that's happening in things like edibles, like with fast onset edibles, and kind of this trajectory from 100 milligram single serving product to these 10 milligrams to 5 to 2.5 to now, you know, fast onset. And I think even you look at kind of the landscape, maybe this is the 2.0 cannabis you're talking about, Todd, with the CPG play. I think there is so much innovation happening. It's driving the category growth. So you've got these new consumers coming in, you got existing consumers, you know, coming in or staying in, and then you've got all these, you know, new types of products that are on store shelves, you know, coupled with, you know, market adoption. I think, you know, all these things are good fundamentals, and why we're going to continue to see significant growth even in markets like Colorado, you know, that's been legal for so long. You know, sales are still climbing, right? And
acting very
it hasn't right, it hasn't flattened. So, you know, I think all of that points to, you know, a bright future for, you know, these emerging markets that are just now getting their frameworks today.
And the other point I'll make about 2.0, I'm sorry, Emily, if I interrupt you. I was just going to say real quick, you know, as we get into the 2.0 landscape and you start to build brands around the different form factors, I think that's going to start chewing through the illicit market faster and faster, right? Because you start to build those brand affinities, like the Crest toothpaste. You know, why do you get Crest? Because I think the first sort of, you know, adoption phase is going to be really, the focus is going to be on the, you know, best quality at the most, you know, at the best prices. Like, what makes me feel good for this at the best prices? But over time, as the 2.0 form factors evolve and the brands evolve, I think the illicit market's going to take a smaller share of the overall spend. And then also, paradoxically, the vape crisis, right? I said at the time, I thought it was the best thing that ever happens to the legal cannabis market. It's just going to take some time to figure it out. And, like, you know, I think that's also playing a big hand. It's the safety issues, the emulsification agents, and all that jazz. That was, I remember that from September of September of 2019. That was fun. Yeah. But anyway, that's all in the past. I think there's, you know, when the state of business is getting better and the stocks are going lower, you say, what am I missing? The stocks don't lie. The reaction to news is more important than news itself. All of that, you know, I've been trading for 31 years, is gospel, right? And you say, why? Well, it's because one by one, the custodians and the banks have systematically restricted trading in these securities to the point where you've got a handful of Canadian retail and like 3 funds or 4 funds that are trafficking in these names, and that's it. And one of the funds who was in had to get out in the spring, and, you know, probably added 10% to the decline because there was nobody left to buy. But again, I think you take 2 giant steps back, and we're going to look back at this and say, holy cow, this was really the eye of the storm. This was the opportunity to kind of push the chips back in, because not only have we got all of the overbought conditions now oversold, but sentiment has flipped from, you know, bullish to really bearish, and people are nervous, and it's got all of the sort of pieces in place. We just need a catalyst, whether that's safe banking or whether that's continued state adoption or fundamentals. I don't know, but I do think the longer this takes to sort of slowly evolve, incrementally evolve, if we don't get full legalization for a couple of years, I think it's a shame for all of those people in jail. I think it's a shame for social justice and all of it. But it's not the worst case scenario for the equities of securities, because by the time CPG can enter the space for the buy build, these things are going to be 5 times the size.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I mean, you know, speaking of people in jail, you know, one of the headlines this week was a Lakers player, Alex Caruso, I believe, was arrested for possession. You know, Lakers player arrested for possession. I mean, this is the world that we are still in.
And it was just stems and seeds, I understand, right? He had a blind.
It was brickweed.
Stems and, by the way, like, I'm going to make an announcement, never been disclosed before. I was surrounded by sheriffs in the Palm Beach airport because they found a half of a roach in my Dob kit that I didn't even smoke. Somebody gave to me. I didn't want it. I put it there. I was staying at my grandmother's. I didn't want to find it in the garbage. So I put it in my Dob kit. I got surrounded by like 20. I started sweating. It was crazy. Like, this was 2006. So what is that? That was a long time ago. But like, it wasn't that long ago. This is all crazy. Like the fact that we're talking here, the three of us, and making our living on this industry while there are people in jail right now for doing exactly what or similar things to what we're doing is the most fucked up fuckery of it all. And it's not good. And I think it's going to get to a boiling point because it's not right. It's been going on too long, and I think the people have power now, and the politicians if they want to get elected. I mean, this is how cannabis is going to get through. For the first time in history, they care more about getting elected than they do about taking big pharma money, and that's how we're going to get through this. It's about the money and about getting elected.
Yeah, it is. Go ahead, Emily.
No, it's just a classic 2 steps forward, a step back with this kind of a thing. At least they, arrested him, released him, but he got arrested, he got, booked. And I just had my Athletes for Care board meeting last week, and that whole organization is all about moving athletes. I mean, it's not the only objective, but one of the big ones is this discourse around getting athletes off of opiates and getting them a more wellness focused program. And cannabis is a critical part of that. And a lot of the athletes share really compelling stories about how they've been self-medicating with cannabis illegally all of this time, because it's really one of the things that when they're recovering from, impact injuries or whatever it may be, it's one of the only things that really helps them. And also from a stress perspective, and meeting their partners and their families too, and hearing about the differences in the personalities once they've gotten off the opiates and they're using cannabis as more of a wellness routine. It's just incredible. And so then you see the leagues are starting to lean in on this, like the NFL is putting money into researching it. But then you have, a pro athlete in Texas, and we just talked about Texas and their advancement from 0.5% to 1% of THC. Right. Oh. Yeah, and then he's getting arrested for a possession, and it's like, oh man. I mean, it's just a good reminder we still have a long way to go on this. So
yeah, it is crazy. And yesterday I saw Seth Rogen on Conan O'Brien, and Conan talking about retiring, and Seth is like, well, maybe you should try cannabis, and he's like, I never tried it, and gave him a joint on air, right? And that's the world we live in. Some people are getting arrested on one hand, other people are just consuming, we're running businesses in this. The whole thing is kind of crazy. And I think that friction, it is going to get to this boiling point. We're going to have to see some change, sooner than later. I think people are recognizing it, right? You can't hold these two thoughts at the same time forever, where it's one hand prohibited and one hand this great booming industry that's bringing tax revenue and all these benefits, in the legal market. So looking for some change. And speaking of change, Todd, I know you launched a Canna for Good. It's Canna, CANNA, and the number 4, good.org, right? And you're selling some merchandise there that goes to good organizations, or a percentage of the sale. You want to touch on that real quick?
Yeah, no, it's fun. I was actually working on an app for a number of years that would automatically, I'm not going to get into it, but the whole point was to build a mechanism to allow the consumer to choose the charity that is important to them, as opposed to saying, hey, we're a brand, we're going to give to Last Prisoner Project, or we're going to give to research, or we're going to give to another worthy charity, all of which are worthy, obviously, charities. We thought, the way to engage is to give that choice to the consumer. And as the other thing I was working on sort of fell apart, I'm like, well, this is still a good idea, but it has to be the softest, coolest, looking content or brand out there in terms of cannabis. And so for every product, there's $5 to go to a charity that you choose. which is pretty much the margin, but you get some good-looking clothes and you get to help a charity, and it's hopefully it's good. Weber Wild's on there, our friend Jason Wild and Chris Weber, their charity, they have a social justice initiative, so that sort of stuff. And obviously if you want to give more, you can give more, but we wanted to create a mechanism for the community to give back, and not just in a way that tells them, prescribes how, but gives them the choice to help direct their funds. So that was the idea behind it.
Yeah, well, very, very well done. I believe I have a shirt coming in the mail here, so I'm excited to see if it is the softest.
And we're adding things. So if you have ideas, throw it in there. There's some cool items in there.
Right on. Very, very cool.
Quotes. Yeah.
Yeah, the quotes on some of the stuff. It's great to see, and just cool. Just what a nice community we have in this cannabis industry.
Nicer when they're nicer in bull markets. But who isn't, right? There's a lot of people. But I'll tell you this, like if I would have told anybody in February that New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut were all coming online and you could buy these things 40% lower in 4 months, nobody's been thinking twice. Everybody is like, I would love that. Now that we're here, they're like, yeah, I'm selling. I don't like the way they act. It's like, please. And it's like, I got plenty of risk. We're not telling anybody what to do. Make your own decisions. This is a big boys and girls game. But this is a gift, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining today, Todd, on your birthday of all days. It really means a lot for you to spend the time with us here. Really a great conversation. I thought people can find you online, on Twitter, certainly.
Well, actually, I'm off. I took off from Twitter today to spend with my girls before they go to camp, and the cannabis stocks rallied, and then everyone's like, stay away. So I'm off Twitter until we have a red day again, and I hope that's a long time because we certainly earned it.
Okay. So if you're not active, that explains it. And then on Cannabis Confidential, your Substack. So can people subscribe there? Are you still going to be doing that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I got to do that. If I didn't have the ability to write, I think my head would explode. So I have to do that from a self-preservation standpoint, and it's fun and it's free, right? It's like everyone's like, oh, you should charge. I'm like, it's not really, it's not really the point. As to Emily, what we talked about earlier, you want to build a community, you want to make it as inclusive as possible, and you want to try to keep it fun and light. And when you have 40% drawdowns, it's easier said than done, but that's especially when you kind of got to look a little harder for perspective. So, it's not for everyone, but it's free, so it doesn't cost you anything to check it out.
Yeah, and you can find that at toddharrison.substack.com. Is that the best?
I have no idea.
No idea. Just search Cannabis Confidential, maybe.
I know it's on Substack.
Yeah, I'm a subscriber, and I can wholeheartedly recommend it. And your meme game is very strong, certainly.
Yes.
So,
thank you.
Thank you. That's a skill. Well, thank you so much. That'll do it for this week's episode. Looking forward to seeing what happens between now and the next one. Thanks again, Todd. Thanks, Emily. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.